Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. This is episode number 7 for the week. We are just making it a marathon, and today we're welcoming to the show Todd Libby. Todd, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Thanks, Jason, for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Today we're playing it risky because Todd found out this morning that his internet provider is doing some work in the area, so we're hotspot streaming. So everybody, be patient. We might have some streaming issues, but we're gonna try to get through this anyways. Todd, for folks who aren't familiar with you or who only know you for eating lobster rolls bigger than your entire self, do you want to give us a little bit of a background?
I have been tinkering with technology since I was 9, and I learned BASIC on a Commodore 64, so it's been a while. But professionally, I've been developing for over 20 years now. I started with, basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and went on to PHP, Perl, all that good stuff way back in the day. And now I am an accessibility engineer at Webstaurant Store,
Hmm.
and I do auditing. I've been doing accessibility for as long as that I've been doing professional web work. So again, over 20 years of accessibility experience, and yeah, just trying to make the world more inclusive and more accessible for people. So,
I love that.
and
I think it's it and I think like so accessibility is something that we've covered on the show a few times. We've brought on folks like we've had Lindsay Kopach, we've had Marcy Sutton, we've had we're always kind of looking into how do we make this more accessible to more people? How do we make the things that we build actually include everyone? And I think that something that is always interesting to me when you talk about accessibility is that it can feel like I feel like when I first started learning about accessibility, the way that it felt at first was like accessibility was like building a second website for people who couldn't use the website that I'd built. And that the amount of work that felt like was a lot, and it was very overwhelming, and I was very intimidated, and I was like, I don't even know how, like, how does somebody use the web if they can't see well, or if they can't hear, or things like that. And I just started like panicking, and it led to paralysis. I was like, I can't. Okay, I had decision paralysis. I knew I needed to do something. It felt like there was too much to do, and so I panicked and did nothing. And over time, it's felt like maybe I was overreacting a little bit. Maybe it's not actually two websites. So in your experience, what is the impact of accessibility, not just on people who like are actually like maybe who we would think of as like the people who need accessibility, like somebody who is legally blind, or somebody who is hearing impaired, but how does accessibility impact all of us?
that's a good question. So, it thinking from an organizational standpoint, um, from the top down, companies don't get sued
Hmm.
unless they're using an accessibility overlay, which I don't know if we're going to touch on that today, but a lot of people have probably seen that argument on Twitter a lot lately. And but anyways, it from an organizational standpoint, stakeholders, you don't get sued. Um, Working to teams and managers, it makes life so much easier to bring in accessibility from the very start, less stress on you developers, designers, less money spent working, less time spent working, because when you're doing, the semantic markup, and you're doing progressive enhancement from the very beginning and using all those things that, you know, make things accessible, you don't have to go back and redo it. You don't have to
Hmm.
spend that extra time. You don't have to spend that extra money. People don't have to get stressed out about it. They don't have to work 60 hours a week. you know, um, and it just makes things better, not only for the users but the people working on it, and it basically for everybody. So
Mm.
when you're making an accessible product that translates to somebody in a rural area who's still using a 3G connection, and they can look at your website, they can buy whatever off your website, let's say lobster rolls off the top of my head, for instance. And it's accessible. So yeah, it has an impact on everybody. And a lot of people are surprised that it has an impact on everybody.
Yeah. Well, and today you technically you're on a hotspot. There are going to be websites that just straight up will not work on your hotspot because they're too big, too slow. They're just not designed for a low bandwidth connection. And that's we don't think about that, but like one of the words that I've heard, or a phrase that I heard that really hit home for me, was this idea of being situationally disabled. And that accessibility features aren't necessarily only for people who have what you might consider to be a like permanent disability, like being visually impaired, but that sometimes someone needs to be able to use a door while holding a toddler. They are situationally, they only have one hand available to them. Today, you don't have access to high bandwidth internet, so situationally today you are on a lower bandwidth connection and need those concerns. If I get on a train and I'm trying to, check something on the internet, and I go through a tunnel, suddenly I have one bar and I can't get really any signal at all. Again, situationally, and all of those things are accessibility concerns. And like you said, if we build things to be semantic, if we build things to kind of focus on how do we make sure that if most of the features on this site don't work, you turn off JavaScript, you something times out, all those things happen. How do we make sure that that experience still works, that people can get done the things that they need to get done? And when I started thinking that way, when I was like, okay, if I just write this as like, if I turn off styles and I turn off JavaScript, is this site still useful? And what I found was, just by thinking about my markup that way, suddenly I had accomplished a huge amount of the things that would have been considered like accessibility retrofitting had I not thought about it that way and just started putting divs on a page and making them look like the design. And that, like, reframing it that way, like, okay, what happens when somebody needs to use this website on the train? What happens when somebody has a really dim display? We're talking about color contrast today. I think that's a very a lot of times I turn the brightness down on my displays so that I don't get a reflection in my glasses when I'm on video. And that means that if I go to a site that has low contrast, I straight up can't read it. Like, a lot of times I won't even see that text is there because the brightness on my display is like 20% or something. That's like not things that you would maybe traditionally consider to be accessibility features, but that is how I access the web. I access the web with a really dim display, and that means I need it to be accessible to me in that situation.
Mhm.
Have I ever
That,
heard of contact lenses? Man, the glasses are part of my it's part of my personality now. I don't even know what I would do. Look, no one even recognized me. It's like the Clark Kent Superman thing. I take these off and like, who the heck is that guy?
exactly, exactly. Well, I know what you're talking about there because I get migraine headaches often, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
always keeping the display dim, and I'm always using dark mode, and I know the feeling. I can go to a website that uses animation or uses motion,
Mm.
and I can, because the vestibular, if it's not accessible, if the animation's too fast, or if parallax scrolling especially,
Ooh, yeah.
I can get it can trigger a migraine headache. um and you know a lot of testing, from what I found, is the key to make sure that your product works on something like my phone, or a 2G, or even a
Right.
3G. I mean, now even a 4G, I guess. a lot of testing, a lot of testing with people with disabilities. There are
Mm-hmm.
places that specialize in that, and one I can think of right off the top of my head is called Fable. Um,
Okay.
and it's make for developers making sure that you know the product you're putting out can be used by somebody that's having problems like I am today. Um, I want to use your app, but for whatever reason, the cable company decided to work on my internet today, and I got to use my phone as a hotspot. So I want to use your app. Can you please make sure that it can work sufficiently with that decreased connectivity that I have?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so today we wanted to focus on, well, you said something interesting about color contrast, and I don't want to take that moment from you. So will you tell everybody what you told me before this call about color contrast?
Um, you're going to have to
You
remind
were
me.
talking about that report, the
Oh, yes, yes. The WebA Million report. Yes. Um, so color contrast is the number one issue for the third straight year in the WebA Million report. That is the problem on the web with accessibility. So the WebA Million report is a report of the top 1 million websites and their homepages.
mm-hmm.
And WebAIM, the organization, they test those web pages for accessibility. 86.3%, I think it is this year, which is, I believe,
A lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. So
It's too many.
it's a lot. Yeah, and yeah. So that averaged out to be, I think they found 56 million issues with these homepages, which is, it averaged out to be 56 issues per homepage, which is, again, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Color contrast being the number one reason. And I think it's you're losing a potential of 1/4 of the population in this country and between 15 and 20% worldwide as an audience if you're not making things accessible. That's pretty much the bottom line.
Yeah. And contrast is one of those things that can be very tricky, right? Because if you have, 20/20 vision and you've like something that seems perfectly clear to you is completely invisible to me on my dim screen, right? And that so one of the things that I'm really interested in talking to you about today, Todd, is how do we catch that? Like, when I was younger, it was hard for me to gauge when contrast was wrong. And I only knew kind of it was like this sort of group think knowledge of like, I'd kind of heard around the community that we need contrast to be good. And so I would, and like what people had told me is like, well, like squint at the screen. And if you can still see that there's like text and a background, then contrast is fine. And I was like, okay, that's probably good enough, right? I would do that at all my screens, but I was still shipping stuff that was under contrast. And so what I'd love to dig into today is just kind of how can we be sure that we're doing this right? And how can we do it in a way that's not like, like you said, we shouldn't be doing rework. So not how do I take a design and then redo the design with contrast in mind, but how do we think about this from conception through development through shipping so that we're just getting it right the first time and never shipping something that needs to be redone for fixing contrast and things like that. So it might make sense actually to start looking at a screen here so we can share some tools and stuff. So let me switch us over into pair programming view. And before we get started, here's that WebAIM report. I dropped it in the chat, but I'm just going to link one more time. So before we get too far in, let's do a quick shout out. We've got live captioning happening on this show like we do on every show. That's provided by White Coat Captioning. Thank you, Rachel, who's here today doing the captioning. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors. Netlify, Fauna, and Auth0, all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people. I appreciate it a lot. It makes makes my heart warm, and I'm very appreciative that they're willing to do that. And today we have Todd Libby on the show, so make sure you go and give Todd a follow. And you know, we're talking about lobster rolls a lot today. You may have seen some lobsters in the chat. I'm just gonna see if I can find. Let's see how long it takes to find a picture of a lobster roll in Todd's media history.
It's been a while.
I don't know. I bet we're gonna find one in the next few.
More than likely. There's a lot of Arizona pictures right there. Now that I'm out in Arizona. But
was that one? No,
Jesus,
tacos.
That's
donuts.
Tacos. Donuts, yep. Oh, there's one right there, of course.
There we go. So so Todd is like a competitive lobster roll eating champion at this point.
Should be, but I'm not. No, I like those food challenges, and I've done a few of them. And yeah, it's the food guy in me. And I used to work in restaurants a lot on the line, so you know that's another thing that's.
I feel like that's a conversation for another day. I also used to work the line. But yeah, so okay, I'm very much going on a tangent here, and I apologize. But what is your current personal record for largest lobster roll consumed?
It's way down in that timeline of mine, but I ate 2 3/4. Well, no, 1 3/4 lobster rolls. The lobster rolls were 2 feet long. Each lobster roll had 5 1/4 pounds of lobster meat in it. So I ate 1 3/4 of it.
I'm sorry. Okay, so roughly 9 pounds of lobster roll in one sitting.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I like yesterday I had a whole burrito and I was like pretty uncomfortable afterwards. So I don't envy you the heartburn after 9 pounds of lobster roll.
That was a long car ride home, and I wasn't driving, so I got to take a nap. So that was the best nap I probably ever had in a car.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about contrast. So maybe one of the first things that we can do is let's just see, how does one even measure this on the web? Like, what's a good tool that I can use if I want to see how contrast is on a given website?
I would go to, let me get up here. I think I want to say contrastchecker.com.
There's a WebAIM contrast checker. Is that the one?
We can use that one as an example. I mean, there's so many out there. Yeah, why don't we use this one? Because this one's this one's a good one too. So if you scroll down into that area, is that actually a working one? I hope it is.
I think it is. Yeah. So we can, as we make the text lighter, we can see that we're now failing. And you can see this happen too, right? Like, and this is where design sensibility can clash a little bit with like usability, because somebody's like, well, I want it to be subtle. This is not important text. I don't want it to be, whatever. And you can also see here that it's not the same threshold for different sizes. So like, this is still pretty light and it passes AA, but it's not passing for smaller text. And then just, here we go. Oh, okay. All right. So now we're getting closer. And if we wanted to use it for small text, there we go. Now this is finally high enough contrast to pass on smaller text. But that all changes with the backgrounds too. Like, as soon as the background is a gray color, now the rules are different. But yeah, like, I think I've been on websites where this sort of thing happens, where like the text is, somebody didn't think about it and they put a link and the default styles on the link or on the black background, and I can't read that now. Like, that's not working for me.
So the differences here, our normal text is 4.5 to 1 ratio. So the current scoring system, and it's a little difficult to explain going into a new scoring system, which is still down the road, but 4.5 to 1 is the contrast ratio for text that is or they go by, and this is how old the scoring system is using measurement, 18-point font.
Point.
Be that as it is, it's 4.5 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
Large text is 3 to 1. Graphical, if you see the graphical objects and user interface components, that's 3 to 1, and that measures adjacent colors to the user interface component. AAA is normal text is 7 to 1, and large text is 4.5 to 1.
So 7 to 1, and you can see here this is pretty. And so what is the difference between like AA and AAA? Like it feels. So there's a part of me that just always wants to see all the tests pass, right? So
right.
There's a part of me that just looks at this and goes, okay, well, I'm just always going to go 7 to 1. And I guess the question that I have is there a reason that you wouldn't? Like what's the delineation between AAA and AA?
It's a very, I want to say, gray area to me, anyways. I mean, ask 100 accessibility, people that question, you're going to get 100 different answers.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever threshold they had between AA and AAA, and even A to AA, was, and I'd have to look back at the WCAG guidelines, but I believe it was the hue. Now I could be wrong, but I think it was the hue and the contrast between the foreground and background color.
Okay.
So as far as how far you should go, there's, again, different thoughts on this. My thought is, and I see it a lot, that people go 4.5 to 1 and say, yeah, go a little over 4.6 to 1 and stop. Okay, to use an example. That's good. That does meet the requirement for AA, but, and we'll get to the vision simulator later, that really isn't or couldn't be inclusive to everybody. Somebody with protanopia or tritanopia or one of the vision deficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
But that contrast between, and basically I've learned through being in the W3C and talking with a lot of brilliant people over there, it's not, color contrast isn't how contrast is between foreground and background color. It's how our brain perceives those colors.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I mentioned the new guideline, the new scoring system for 3.0, which is, again, still far down the road, that comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
That said, making contrast work is very important these days. So I'll tell somebody, go 5 to 1, go 6 to 1, try to get that 7 to 1. So white text on black, background is a 21 to 1 ratio. That's as far as you can get. You don't want to do that because there's always that chance that somebody can see that and it'll be all blurry, like they're, give it the squint test. that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
You touched on that earlier. That's the perfect example of giving that a look and squinting at it and saying, no, can't see it. I do that all the time. I have perfect eyesight. I
Well,
use
and
that term loosely.
I mean, yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat, right? Like I wear glasses, but in terms of passing a 20/20 vision test, like yeah, I do okay. But I still, at night I get like light halos around things, and that's one of the reasons that like computers give me trouble sometimes is like light halos
Mm-hmm.
are kind of a problem. And so and I love that you brought this up that like the solution to contrast is not to go as hard as possible. Like this is actually harder to read for me than something that sits around here, right? Like this is kind of softer on the eyes and makes it a little bit easier. And you put a little bit of color in the background to soften this up and you've got a much nicer like easy on the eyes kind of reading experience versus something that is this like really harsh like bam, that's right in your face, it punches in the eyeball.
Yeah.
We don't want that.
Yeah. So here, a good example for me is if you make the background, let's see, what is the yellow hex color code? Of course, I can't remember these hex codes. I don't think it's working still. So, um, boy, what is it? I can't even remember. I think, can you get the color pick, the color swap? Yeah, there you go. If you do yellow,
Yellow.
that's good. And
Okay.
you do a white text. I ran into this problem um, on a form that had this as so I signed up for the newsletter and this came back to me with a message. I can't read that. I don't know about you. I
Yeah, I
don't know about
can
anybody in the chat. I can't
having
read that.
having trouble with this for sure. This is not that is pretty rough. Yeah,
So
and I found myself as I've gotten older, this has gotten harder for me, and so I a lot of times have to like select the text, but you can see here that this doesn't make a whole lot of helpful difference because of the text selection color. So, worst case scenario, in a few rare circumstances, I find myself opening DevTools so that I can edit the color of something so that I can actually read it. And that is not an option that's afforded to the majority of people because opening the DevTools and just changing the way a website works is not a thing that they care to do or necessarily know how to do. So they'll
right,
just leave, like
right.
go somewhere else, right? Assuming they have the option, of course.
Yes, and that's how I got into accessibility, seeing because I have and I know people, friends, family that have visual issues, visual
Mm,
disabilities, and I have another couple of family members with other disabilities as well. And seeing the frustration on their face when they come into something or they run into something on the web that is inaccessible, and seeing the frustration, that look of I'm just going to give up, I don't want to do this anymore because it's inaccessible, that is what lit the fire underneath me
hmm.
to jump on the accessibility train.
Yeah.
And if people, I think, saw that, and there's a lot of people that probably do, that would probably get them on board as well. And I've, not to take away from what we're doing here, but if developers and designers even just took the time to say, how can we include everybody?
Hmm.
That starts, and this being at the beginning of a project, that starts a good habit to take and carry on with that.
Hmm.
Um, you know, so I I always say on Twitter, accessibility is a right, not a privilege,
Mm.
and that's especially true with color contrast. So then there was an instance where I had a form that I was trying to fill out that was dark, a dark blue background. The input was a lighter blue background, and the text was black. I couldn't read that.
Oof. Yeah, that's
So
rough.
it's it's all in thinking about that inclusion and that accessibility aspect. I mean, here's a good example that you have up right now
Mm-hmm.
is, oh, I have a form, but I have disabled part of that form for a certain reason. And the text is going to be like that normal text you have there.
Mm-hmm.
As we can see, it fails both contrast checks.
Right.
So it's just testing out colors with, and there are a ton of color contrast checkers. If you search for color contrast checker, you're going to get, pages and pages of hits with
And do we even get
links.
one in the browser? Yeah, check this out. We get
So,
a
yep,
checker in the browser too, where we can
yep,
see what these are. So it'll let you use suggested color to fix. Wow. Okay, this is new.
yep,
That's nice. And so now we're at 4.5, right?
yep,
And then if we want to take it even further, we can get in here and start like moving it around. Oh, look at this, y'all. It starts showing you your different ratios. So we can take this
yep.
up and we can take this up. Oh, to get it to 7, we're gonna have to go all the way. Can't even get to AAA with this particular background color, right? And that's a good thing to know too. Like that's a choice we
Yep.
just made. This background color cannot meet the most accessible standard.
Right. Yeah, and that's thing like that. And is that we're in Firefox, correct? Or is that
This
Chrome?
one's actually Edge.
Oh, this is Edge. Okay. See, that is something I did not know that Edge had. So
I
that is
honestly
good
didn't
that you
either. I
brought
was
that
kind
up.
of opening it to see what would happen. But yeah, I mean, it's just
Well,
really, really cool that we can do that. And then you were saying that like Firefox does the same thing. So let me open Firefox and let's poke some fun at Twitter, I think. So let's see, it opened in the wrong monitor. Let's bring it over here. And we will go in and let's just do some checking on. Whoa, that opened in the whole thing. Let's make that a little bit smaller. Then I'm going to get one of these and let's just check. Like, I have a feeling this doesn't meet contrast requirements. So if I want to check that, do I just click here? It does. It exactly meets contrast
yep,
requirements. Look at it go. See, that looks
barely,
really dim to me. Yeah.
barely.
This kind of like challenges my ability to read. It's almost too dark. And that, you know what? And that's a good lesson learned because this technically meets the standard and I'm still kind of struggling a little bit to read that text.
Yep. Yeah. And if you click on the double chevron right there in the Dev Tools, so if you click off that
I'm
and
assuming
you
it's
choose accessibility, yep,
okay.
and you go to simulate and choose that little drop down,
Oh,
we have the vision simulator for Firefox here.
wow. Wow. That, I mean, that really, I mean, look how much that, like the lobster just kind of disappears in different
Yeah.
setups. Like in the red, it's gone.
Yeah.
Um, no color. I do like looking at this because when you go to no color, a lot of contrast issues become way more stark. Contrast loss. This is a hard one for me. Like I feel like this is where I'm headed with my vision right now. Is contrast loss like this, and you can start to see where things just start to disappear. Like this little buddy here is real hard to spot with that contrast loss. And I have a feeling that other websites things would disappear entirely with this simulation.
Yeah, so somebody in chat has said review the CubeCon NA 2021 color scheme. So I don't.
CubeCon North America 2021. Here is. Oh wow, there's a lot of color in here. Yeah, let's take a look. Let's see how this one looks. We'll accept some. Yeah. Okay, this looks okay. This is working. Let's see how it looks with no green. That's better. It's easier to read.
Now there's a WCAG guideline that says, make sure that color isn't the only way to convey a message. Now, that's with like form elements and error messaging and stuff like that. But I try and carry that over to if your brand has certain colors,
mm-hmm.
make a palette that kind of responds to what we were looking at in that vision simulator. Some of them may be impossible. Some of them, depending on a brand color, but it can be done. So and I know companies, corporations, they don't want to take the time to do that, or a lot of companies now, I shouldn't say every company, but a lot of companies now are looking for accessibility people to join their teams to make things accessible. And I think that's probably from a fear of being sued.
Well, because, I think there's like the kind of cold pragmatic, kind of utilitarian sense of like, for the business to continue, it needs to avoid litigation, and litigation has become so expensive that it's now worth hiring a accessibility professional. But I'm also seeing that there seems to be a shift in the industry, like in the fabric of the industry, where developers care about this. And I think a lot of it was lack of awareness, right? People like you and Marcy Sutton and everybody else who's doing all this work to raise awareness around, Leonie Watson doing incredible work to raise awareness around accessibility and its importance, has led to the industry at large has more empathy. And so what I've seen is that when we're writing, like at Netlify, for example, when we write job descriptions, it's not like nobody at our company has ever said we should hire for accessibility because we'll get sued. It's always we should, let's make sure that's in the job description so people understand that we value it here. And that's very new. Like, I've worked at a lot of companies, even companies that have a classically pretty good record for being accessible, like IBM. Putting accessibility into a job description wasn't really a thing that you would see, even 5-6 years ago when I was there. But it is there now. You're seeing it in more job descriptions where it's just kind of being baked in, like, hey, are you paying attention to accessibility? Hey, let's bring in this person. They're an expert. They can help make sure that our design system meets the needs. And I think that that's fueled by a combination. Like there's more empathy in the industry, and there's also more pressure. We saw Domino's get sued. We saw Beyonce get sued. And those sorts of things create that there's your business case if you need a business case, but there's a human case that feels like it's actually gaining ground in a way that kind of warms my heart.
Yeah, and it's really unfair for me to say that it's just a fear of getting sued, because like you said, that's not totally the case. The reason why I brought up being sued is because we're on a record breaking track as far as this country in lawsuits. So last year, and I think the prior 2 years, so since 2018, there has been an average of about 2,200 lawsuits a year for accessibility alone. And this year it was on track for 4,500. So it is unfair, because that's basically, you're looking at sites that are being sued in the retail industry, the government, and finance industries. Those are the main three. And then, of course, you have the bulk of those lawsuits, I believe, were in New York and Florida because the financial aspect in New York and the healthcare industry in Florida. So that's where that comes in. But
Mm-hmm.
and that's the chart. So it's 86.4. 86.3 was last year for low contrast.
Well,
And then
and
you
this
see
is
some of the
it's pretty
others.
heartbreaking that this is getting worse, not better.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And what that may be, a lot of what I've run into is the client doesn't have the budget. Well,
Mm,
if you just do it from the beginning, then the client will have it in the budget
yeah. Well, and
because
to your earlier point, if you don't have that budget, what's your legal budget look like?
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, and the other things I've heard is, well, we'll get to that after. Well, again, that carries back to the conversation. If it's done at the beginning, you won't have to go back and you
You know,
won't have to redo it.
you bring up a good point with like the let's do it after. And this is a conversation that I hear in a lot of places where you'll hear somebody say something like um, oh well, we want to tackle our technical debt. And somebody says, when are we going to tackle our technical debt? And they'll say, well, we'll get to that. We just got to get through these feature releases or something. And the
Mm-hmm.
challenge with that is I have never in my entire career seen or heard of a company that said, okay, we're going to stop feature development and tackle technical debt now. So if you don't
Right.
make accessibility a feature, if you don't make whatever that technical debt is part of a feature, it will never get released. That's why a lot of times what we see is somebody says, I'm going to rebuild the whole app. It's not because they wanted to rebuild the whole app. It's they're declaring technical debt bankruptcy, right? They're saying, okay, well, we're never going to get permission to solve all these problems, so we need to make a business case for rebuilding the whole thing for whatever feature reason, so that we can try to solve these technical debt problems. But then, if you don't fix the root problem, which is figuring out how to make technical debt, accessibility, all these things that we claim are critical, if we don't make those part of our feature release process, then we just build that debt snowball again and end up 2-3 years down the road scratching the whole thing and starting from scratch and saying, hey, we'll get it right this time. And I mean, how much do companies spend rebuilding their entire tech stack that they would have saved if they just made these things that make their tech stack unmanageable part of their feature release process?
Mm-hmm. That brings up a good point. So if Domino's Pizza had just made their app accessible,
Mm-hmm.
that would have cost them $36,000. But instead, they dragged it out and spent millions in court. I mean, right there is a good example. Um, if you're so accessibility is just, and somebody said it in chat, accessibility is good design, which is true. It's very true. Accessibility is good workflow. Accessibility is, and you brought up, accessibility being a feature. Accessibility isn't really a feature as much as a methodology to
Mm.
improve that feature
Yes.
or to improve that component. Accessibility isn't just a checklist either. I mean, you
Right.
have it's not just a checklist. It's not just the WCAG guidelines either, because there's so much gray area right now in the WCAG guidelines. And if anybody in the chat has gone through and tried to read the WCAG guidelines, it is a very technical manual, um, which is what we're working on in WCAG 3,
Mm.
that it uses plain language. I've been railing for a while now. We have to make the guidelines, readable for people that are just starting out, just wanting to know how to implement accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, if you look at 2.2 for 2.1, it's a very technical manual. So a lot of very bright people are working on the plain language to, for someone that says, how do I get started?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
And
you know
there
this.
are many ways.
And somebody brought up a good TypeScript tea time is saying, you know, unfortunately, DevTools won't help you with redesigning the brand, and so
Correct.
that's a good point, because one of the big challenges that we run into is that a lot of times developers don't have control over things like colors, and
Yeah.
that points to, I think, the need for design and dev to have not just handoff points where like, well, here's the design. And you know, developers I know hate meetings. And so a lot of times devs will do whatever they can to not have to go to meetings, or they'll put a meeting on in the background and then check their Twitter. But a lot of times those design meetings, those product meetings, that's where we get to influence these sorts of things. If we can think about the product implications, we can have conversations around the lines of like, okay, well, if we do this wrong, here's how this is going to make dev harder, and here's how this is going to lead to us wasting a lot of money and time in the long run. That can impact the product discussion, and that can be like being in those meetings is frustrating. And you know, I'm saying this as somebody who has basically ascended to the level of my career where my entire job now is meetings. But if you can figure out how to identify where those meetings are happening and show up and be helpful. You know, if you show up to the meeting and you just say, that's a bad idea, that's a bad idea, like, okay, of course, that's not going to work very well. But you can go in collaboratively and say like, hey, you want to make a great design. Let's make sure this design is great for everybody. Here are some considerations when we're building for the web to make sure that we don't have rework, that we don't open ourselves up to litigation, that we make sure that our users aren't angrily tweeting about us because we didn't include them in our new design. We can provide that guidance early in the process as part of that discussion, and that can lead to much better designs, much better product prioritization, because at the end of the day, not everybody's an expert in everything. And product managers maybe have never had to think about accessibility, so they're not even aware that you need time to do that sort of work. And if we don't tell them until they give us the scope, how, like, we can't expect them to rewrite the plan, right? So we need to be there when the plan is happening and share, right? That's one of the big challenges for developers, is like, so much of this job is social. So much of this job is interpersonal. It's, you know, being a developer is 40% writing code and 60% making sure that the things that we're told to do are the right things. And
Right.
that requires, unfortunately, talking to people.
Yes. Yes, it does. It does. And I wrote an article, which is on Smashing Magazine, about that, about having somebody on each team as an accessibility advocate.
Is this the right one?
In that, yes, it is. You know, having somebody that is an accessibility advocate or champion in design and in development and in marketing and in QA, and having those people meet and having them have a positive diplomatic discussion about how do we make this product or our products accessible for everyone, and take the load of, again, stress, time, money off developers, designers, QA, marketing, the whole company as a whole, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see climate designers in the chat just mentioned, you know, that they're focused on sustainability. But what we're talking about with accessibility, like this, it's at the end of the day, it's advocacy. Are
Yes.
you making sure that the things that you care about have a voice at the table at the right points in the conversations? And usually you will find that if you make an issue visible, other people will say, "Oh, of course." It's not like people are going, "Yeah, never be accessible, you know, screw accessibility." It's more that it just never enters their consciousness. And if you can elevate that conversation around accessibility, around sustainability, around anything that's important, around inclusion, diversity, equity, all those things that we care about, if we make sure that that enters the planning phase of discussion, which again, you got to get into the right rooms, you got to have discussions, you got to be willing to you know, walk somebody around to the point. We don't just get to say do it or else. Those things, you know, usually what I found is that when you bring it into the planning phase, people go, "Oh, yeah, you're right. We should be thinking about that. How do we make that work?" And then you might end up with a compromise that you're not 100% happy with, but you know, another word for compromise is halfway happy, right? And halfway happy is better than we'll get to that later. Right. It's like you want to get as many wins as you can. And sometimes you get all the way there. Like with accessibility at Netlify, we were very lucky because our front end team showed up to the meetings. They've been talking to the designers. The designers are aware of and care about accessibility, and they've collaborated so that the design system that we're building is ground up built with accessibility in mind. All the labels, all of the screen reader implementations, color contrast, all those things actually get tested at the implementation point. Like, here's a design. Does this pass accessibility? Okay, now we can send it to development. And then the same thing. Does this dev actually pass accessibility? Great. Now it can move into the product. And those are gates that happen because of the way that we talk in our company about the way decisions get made. So this isn't a thing that happens by accident, and it's not a thing that happens because we have one hero in the company who cares about accessibility. This is because it's now part of our cultural fabric because those conversations happen.
Yeah, and once you get teams buying into that, in my first point in getting an organization on accessibility is if you get that stakeholder or those stakeholders into and buying into accessibility, it's going to trickle down. It's going to trickle down to everybody else, which makes it a lot easier to get that culture in that organization.
Absolutely.
And for what you were talking about Netlify, that's a great culture to have because I bet everybody isn't frazzled trying to go back and say, oh, we have to make this, accessible because it's not for whatever reason, and people are scrambling around to do changes and things like that. So that's a great culture.
I mean, we scramble for other things, but we're yes. very fortunate. Every company's got its rough edges, but I feel like one of the ones that I'm happy isn't a pain point for us is thinking about this sort of thing. Like it just comes up as part of a consideration. And even in product, when we see the product managers writing down what's going to happen, it shows up as a checklist. It's like, did we check for this? Are we paying attention to this? And that to me is really, really indicative of the fact that we had these conversations and that people are standing up, they're showing up in meetings, they're weighing in. That drives change. Does it feel like it moves way too slow and requires more meetings than it should? Sure, it's a big company. That's how bureaucracy works. But did it actually make an impact? 100% yes.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to touch upon, so I had a friend of mine send me some slides about the economic part of, and let's use color contrast, for instance. Individuals with visual disabilities account for $10.3 billion worth of e-commerce revenue just in this country alone.
Dang.
So it's crucial and important for a brand or a company to say, we need to have a culture of accessibility and inclusion and inclusive design because you want that company to make money in order to pay its people, in order to sell the product. That just makes sense. I mean, you have companies with inaccessible product or, presence on the web, and they're not selling anything, and they're going, why are we not selling anything? Well, your stuff is not accessible.
I mean, it's one of those things that also comes in with the incremental gains. If you have something that is 50% good, you are, and you start getting into like the millions and billions in revenue. Like there's that famous study about web performance, for example, which performance is a form of accessibility because the faster somebody can load your thing, the more likely they are to use it. And they found that it was like for every 100 milliseconds, they were able to shave off a page load time. It had a legitimate, like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in impact on their revenue. That is like 100 milliseconds is less time than it takes us to blink. And that is to think that tiny little bit makes that level of impact in the hundreds of, a 6-figure plus impact on your business. That is a huge sign that like incremental gains add up. And when you're trying to build a business, at the end of the day, like I know we'd all love it if businesses could be well, businesses aren't about making money, but the fact of the matter is everything costs money. So if your business doesn't make money, nobody gets paychecks, you can't afford any of the resources, it all shuts down, you got to go work somewhere else. So if we want the business to be the best business it can be, we have to factor revenue into that. And we have to be thinking about how do we make the company revenue in a way that's good. So if we can incrementally increase revenue by increasing accessibility, as opposed to incrementally increasing revenue by selling user data, for example, I choose accessibility. Like I would much rather make the extra money by doing the work to make this site accessible and accessing that market that wants to pay money, that wants to be included in the internet, much rather than I want to sell anybody's data or like get into the dark patterns of how do I get people to, I don't want to build like on exit popovers. I don't want to build like Byzantine unsubscribe patterns. Like I hate that stuff. I don't want to do that work. That's not fun. I want to, go ahead.
Or spend X amount of dollars for a contract and saying, oh, we'll just use an accessibility overlay. I have to go back to that. And
talk about accessibility overlays, because this is not even something I'm familiar with.
So there are companies out there that will remain nameless because of legal reasons. And if you look it up online, you can find that who they are. Basically, it's injecting JavaScript into your site or putting it in the code. It's basically, I've heard 1 or 2 lines of code, and it brings up an overlay. Let's bring up Heatonist. I'll put that in the chat for Zoom. Heatonist.com. So you'll see on the left-hand side that little black, right there. If you put that up, that is an accessibility overlay. That is another problem right there. Mm-hmm. These tools right here that we're looking at do not make a website accessible. They exacerbate the problem for screen reader users, for blind users, for visually impaired users, even though there are, as you can see, several, you just can't switch it on and off. That's basically it. They just don't work. An accessibility overlay, I like to say, makes your site about as accessible as me putting on a pair of Nikes and playing basketball as good as Michael Jordan. It's just not possible. It'll never happen. It makes these companies money, but it doesn't make things accessible. And they actually block out tools that I use in the for extensions and in the dev tools. It blocks those tools from doing an accessibility audit. So these are this is the modern day snake oil, bottom line.
So it's sort of it's a thing. I'm sure it's done with good intentions, but it's sort of exacerbating the problem rather than solving it.
Yes.
I've never seen one of these before. This is So is this just like tries to? Oh God.
Yeah.
What is it doing? And you can only turn on one at a time?
Yeah.
Oh, is that supposed to help?
I don't think so.
Oof. Oh, started beeping. And I broke it. Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. Like just trying to click that a little bit, it doesn't feel like it's. I mean, I'm coming at this with a very specific experience of the web where I do things a certain way, but like, if I need any of these features, even just finding this is kind of a challenge.
Right, because you have that pop-up to sign up for their newsletter at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have that chat bubble on the lower right. And then so you're getting cognitive overload right from the very beginning when you go on the site. And yes, that is the brand from First We Feast. I informed them about a month ago, you have an overlay, it doesn't make your site accessible. And people in the accessibility space, we're willing to email a company and say, hey, this isn't helping, it's hurting. Would you reconsider? And some companies do. Apparently they haven't reconsidered. They've said, and I find this a lot as well as many other people in the accessibility space do, we get a lot of, we'll let our dev team know about it. Thanks for letting us know. And that's it. So,
and that goes back to what we were talking about with like the tech debt snowball, because I'm sure that somebody on the dev team got that ticket and was like, see, I told you we need to fix this. And product was like, sure, we'll get to that later. We gotta get through this feature launch though. Right. And it's again, nobody's being evil, just priorities are weird, and you're not bundling things together. I think it just comes down to this idea of like, you're never gonna get 6 months to fix all the things that are wrong with your product. Like no one's ever gonna take their foot off the gas with features and, oh, we got a launch coming up. We got this marketing campaign we got to get ready for. We've got this feature that we need to release so that we can promote it. That never stops. As a company, you can't do that because, again, companies have to make money or they cease to exist. And in any sufficiently good or successful company, it's going to have competition. So if you take your foot off the gas, somebody just comes in and does all the things that you were planning on doing, but they do it faster, and then you lose your audience. And again, now you have to go work for a new company. So how do we, instead of saying we need to like focus on this as a primary thing, how do we build it into the process so that it doesn't need focus at all? It just happens as part of the way we do business. And I think that's like, again, you have to build it into the fabric through those conversations and through the way that you make sure that the right people are in the right meetings to make sure this stuff gets advocated for.
Yep, that's exactly it. And somebody also in the chat had said those overlays try to trick Wave, which is from WebAIM. It's a tool for auditing to pass the audit. That's true. And that's one of the tools that particular overlay blocks. And there's a Chrome extension which actually blocks that overlay from appearing if you go on a site that has that overlay. So,
interesting. Okay.
Can't remember what the name of that is, but it's a very handy tool, and I think I may have. Let's see my version of Chrome. Let's find that.
Let's see if we.
Accessibility Bye-Bye, I believe it is.
This one here?
Accessibility Bye-Bye, yes.
Okay, so here is if you want to not see those, you can drop this in and see it and use it. And yeah, I mean it's funny because I didn't expect this conversation to go this way. I'll be completely honest, but I'm glad that we're talking about it because it points out, I think, something that is really at the core of a lot of the trouble that we have as developers. And I think that some of it is that as developers, we sometimes have a tendency to take a back seat on planning and to say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. We're in trouble because this plan is bad. And, the leadership team or the product team or the designers, they made bad decisions and then dropped them on us. And you can, as a developer, just sit at the end of the chain and just take whatever falls down the waterfall. But, when we talk about things like agile, when we talk about, when people talk about collaborative, iterative processes and shipping as a team, not as phases, those sorts of things, they're not there as like productivity hacks, right? That's what they've become. They've kind of been memed that way into, okay, well, yeah, we're going to do agile, you're going to do backlog grooming, you're going to do t-shirt sizing of story points. Like all that stuff that stuff is where the productivity hacking comes in. But at the core of what's being proposed here is developers need to be included earlier in the process. And that means that we have to take some agency over what happens in our jobs. That means like shoulder your way into that planning meeting. Sit through the frustrating calls where everybody bike sheds over whether or not we should build this project at all. If you can get in that room and if you can advocate for the things that are important, you can get it built into the plan. But it's very, very, very hard after something has gone through 6 months of planning to change the plan. Everybody just goes, no, we'll put it in the next plan, right? So you have to be there during the planning phase, and you have to have that frustrating, bureaucratic, multi-month discussion about what's going to be built and why, so that you can make sure the things that matter get built into the fabric of your company, into the plan itself, and not become sidecars that can't make it in because everybody starts cutting corners when things get busy. Right?
Yes.
So yeah, this ended up being a pretty philosophical episode, Todd. I'm not gonna
I've never been accused of being philosophical, so it's new territory for me. But yeah, it's tough, kind of, wedging that accessibility part when something is, like you said, after the planning stage, or 6 months into the planning stage, or even after something has been pushed out and some aspect of that project was overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, color contrast, which color contrast, that's an easy fix. I mean, you just go into the CSS or the SAS, change a hex value or whatever, and make sure it covers a ratio, and you're done. Other things like keyboard accessibility,
Right.
Whether someone can use, I want to make sure that I say accessibility is more than just, somebody who's deaf, somebody who's blind, somebody who, they have. So let me say it this way: somebody that uses a joystick to traverse a site, somebody that uses a sip and puff machine, somebody that uses a braille machine, because not all blind people use a screen reader. There are many facets to accessibility, and some that I haven't even known up until this year, which blew my mind. And that's part of me being in the W3C on the accessibility in the groups, and seeing these things. And it's very enlightening to see some of this stuff that I've never seen before. So that carries over to my advocacy.
And again, every single thing that you just listed, if we write semantic HTML and we make sure that our JavaScript isn't hijacking default functionality, we're already the vast majority of the way there. Yes. And so a lot of this can actually be solved by doing less, and by being intentionally minimal in what we implement in our front ends. That actually means that we're going to be able to ship faster. It means that we're going to have less to maintain. It means that things are going to be more agile and iterable. There's so many benefits of doing this, and you could almost argue that accessibility is. I mean, I'm not actually saying this, so please don't quote this out of context. But you could go in and you could even say accessibility is not the reason we're doing this, right? You can. There's so many outside benefits that happen when you make these choices that even if you weren't thinking about accessibility, it's still worth doing. Now, at the bottom of everything, our core motivation to do anything on the internet should be, I want to make this more accessible to more people. The founding philosophy of the internet is information wants to be free. And if it's not for everybody, it's not free yet.
So you bring up something that just triggered this thought. So how we go on to, we're looking at news items, for instance, and we get to a newspaper online and they have a paywall. you notice that all the good stuff that we want to read is behind a paywall, but all the bad stuff is freely available.
Mm.
That's accessibility right there.
Mm-hmm.
I want accessibility. I want accessibility for the good stuff to read, not the bad stuff. Put the bad stuff behind a paywall, then I'll never look at it. I don't think anybody else would either.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that starts putting us into a like really far down the philosophical rabbit hole here. But
Yes.
you know, you raise a good point. Like when people are doing, and like, how do we solve that problem? Because we don't like ads, we don't like paywalls, and you know, for somebody to do that kind of work to write those in-depth, well-researched articles, it costs money. Somebody's got to pay for it, right? And so, is it a public good if it becomes a nationally owned utility where somebody can get paid to do good journalism? Is it still going to be good journalism? We don't know. My gut says probably not. So we got to pay for it some other way, right? And that really makes it hard. And you know, the other folks, they make their money in other ways, right? When you're peddling misinformation, you're not doing it because you want to get paid for journalism. You're doing it because that misinformation drives a different profit motive. And that really makes the internet hard for doing the right thing sometimes.
You want to get back to color contrast?
We probably should.
Because if not, I'll go off on a tangent on lobster rolls. So,
oof, yeah. I mean, so let's maybe bring this home a little bit. So, for somebody who wants to start building just a piece of this out, we want to make our websites more accessible, and the way that we're going to do that is moving forward. Everybody who's watching this stream right now is going to do an accessibility check. What do we want to do with our color contrast to make sure that it passes that accessibility check for us?
Go a little above the minimum requirements. So if we look at the WCAG guidelines, and if you go to the quick ref, which is that first link right there in the content area. Yep. If you go to 143, which is color contrast minimum,
mm-hmm.
right there you'll get, and this is a great bookmark for people that I recommend, the visual presentation of text and images of text has a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1, except for the following, and then it goes into what we discussed earlier with the 3 to 1, the large text, and so on and so forth. Go a little above that 4.5 to 1. Go 5 to 1, 6 to 1, maybe even 7 to 1. You might hit AAA. That's fine. A lot of people don't go for AAA unless it's specifically required by a client or by an organization. We want to reach AAA level. So basically what for the most part, you're going to find people will settle for the passing AA requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Go a little bit above and beyond that. So right here, that ratio you have right there, 6.47. Yeah, do that. Do the 7. But make sure, so if we go to another site, it's called whocanuse.com. This will give us, if we scroll down, how people see that simulation with Protanomaly, with Protanopia, Deuteranomaly, so on and so forth.
Oh.
You get a great representation of the percentage of the people that have this, cataracts, 33%. This is a great site to test with as well. And if you go back to the bottom, I do want to touch upon this briefly. Situational, I love this part of this. Situational vision events. You're trying to look at your phone with the sun beaming down on it and you can't see it. That is an accessibility issue. And you want to be, I know a lot of people are like, well, you can just cover up the part with the hand, but some people can't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you want that contrast there to address that situation. Dark mode, for instance.
Yeah, and you're bringing up some really good. So let's go here to something that is, let's see this. Let's go to the 4.5. Okay, so we'll get right to the 4.5. This is technically accessible. This passes accessibility, but let's go look at what happens in all these different situations. And it's mostly okay. This one gets a little tricky. This is pretty rough here. And yeah, we start we can see here that it starts getting bad in a few of these where the contrast just isn't there. And so this is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, go above and beyond that. Try to hit that AAA mark. You know, if you can't,
Let's see if we can do it.
Working with a brand, or if you're working with a company that makes it difficult because they already have an established color palette for their organization, that's when you're going to reach into trouble. And as I looked into the chat, I do have a list of accessibility dev tools that we can go through real quick if we have time.
Yeah, we got a few minutes.
And there's another where do they have a situational event, like when I've been staring at my screen all day and can't focus anymore? Yes, I call that going outside and going for a walk. That's the best. That's the best dev tool I have for that, because I do that all the time. Yesterday was a 12-hour day for me, so I got up a few times and went for a walk. So some good tools. Just real quick, let's go. We got the Wave tool it's an extension for Chrome, Edge, and Firefox. That's from WebAIM. That is the first tool I will use. And I get, so basically, which ties into the title of the stream today, that's the first thing I check is color contrast. Every time during an audit, is the color contrast going to fail in some places? Is it going to pass? Looking at, different components, different, parts of headings, text. Headings are very important. And, Jason, you have captioning for this. Captioning is very important to have a color contrast, because you will see sometimes on a YouTube video it's just white text over the background. You have that white text on that black background, which is terrific.
I should probably look at this now, though, because I think this might be pure white on pure black. So I should probably go fix it up so that it doesn't cause the halos for folks.
Right. But that contrast, tone it down a little bit, get that all worked out. That's perfect for captioning. If you have, for instance, keynote slides that use a background. I had one in my talk for Web Directions, which is coming up on November 5th. I have a picture of a lobster roll with some text over it. You can't see that captioning because of the busy background. But if you have that black background or that darker background on that white or lighter white text, you're going to be able to see those captions. So captioning is important as well.
You bring up something,
especially for content.
You bring up something. Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But
you bring up something that I think, I don't know if this was intentional, but meme culture on the internet actually nailed the accessibility of this, because they do the white text with a thick black outline, so that no matter what you put this on, you can put any color of image on here. So if we go to Unsplash and we look for something bright, right? So mine was pretty dark. But if I take this image and I bring it in here, and let's drop one in, and then I take this text and I bring it over and I bring it to the front. Even on this really, really light background, it's still legible. And I feel like, I don't know if this was just because somebody one day was like, man, I can't read my meme, but but it is pretty powerful that you get that, you know, like the way that we've done this. I'm sure it's not perfect, but it mostly solves this problem in a way that, like, if I turn this border off, like, that is awful. And I see stuff like this all the time where somebody will put text like this and you just like lose some of it, you know, and it, you know, if you move it here, okay, that's probably fine. But if you move it up here, it's atrocious. Down here, it's pretty bad. But if you put this stroke back on, no matter where we put it, you can now read it on this photo. And I think that's that's pretty cool. So like +1 to the cheeseburger crew for getting that one right.
Yeah. So Wave is a great tool to start off with. I start, like I said, my audits, I start off using Wave. It also gives you errors and issues. Errors, you know, something does not work. I don't know if they have an example on the, I think they might have an example if you scroll down on that page, or it might be in the, yeah, it's in the video, but you can see where the errors are, where things fail, WCAG guidelines, issues where it's just giving you a warning, and it also gives you contrast checker, which is included in that as well. Very important to look at. It shows you the heading structure of a web page, because skipping a heading level, that's a failure as well, because that has an impact on screen readers and keyboard users as well, as far as skipping a heading level goes. So Wave is a good tool. The Axe Dev Tools by DQ Systems is a great tool. And that one, I usually do the Axe Dev Tools at the end of my audit. That gives you a more technical rundown of errors, warnings. It gives you a good explanation of, here's what's wrong with this, here's how to fix it, here's where it is on the screen and in your code. And Wave kind of does that as well. Another tool is from TPGI, and that's the brief. I'm blanking on that one.
I did it wrong. TPGI.
TPGI. That is, I believe, the ARC platform. The ARC platform, or is the ARC?
I'm looking at something called ARC platform on TPGI here.
I think that might be it. I should know this stuff before I even start blabbing.
Well, it's all right, because we've got some really strong stuff here. Like we've got the dev tools in, I think, you know, Edge and Firefox for sure have contrast checkers. I think that's rolled out to all modern browsers at this point, which is good. Firefox has those simulation tools for checking on your. You go to the accessibility tab, and then you can simulate the different styles to see how everything looks. And this is this is pretty powerful stuff here.
Yep. If you go to the check for issues, that you can also check for color contrast. So if you go down, right there, contrast, you can check contrast there as well.
Look at it go.
That'll give you a check as also.
Oh wow, this whole website has issues. Okay, I see why this one was suggested.
Chrome has a built-in tool, if you go into the code and you hover over a certain part, it will give you a kind of like tooltip with the color contrast as well
Oh,
in
nice.
Chrome. If you look in the dev tools, you can also use, if you go into the experimental part of the Chrome DevTools and turn it on, you can use the new scoring it's APCA scoring.
APCA.
Yep. And that will give you an overview of what contrast will be like in the new scoring system. I don't really recommend using it right now. It's still being worked on, of course, but it's a terrific look at if you want to experiment what things will be like for color contrast down the road. And
Great.
that is that tool I've blanked on is the ARC toolkit. So the ARC toolkit for TPGI.
ARC toolkit. All right, and with that, I unfortunately need to cut you off because we are out of time. So make sure you go and follow Todd on Twitter, and fire these questions off. Like get in there, follow Todd, and ask your accessibility questions. I'm sure that that there's probably a little listicle coming up with some accessibility tools that'll follow up on this. But yeah, so y'all, thank you so much for hanging out today. We are looking at an absolute blast of a week. This is stream number 7 of 8. We've got one more tomorrow. But first and foremost, let's give a quick shout out to our captioning. We've had Rachel here with us all day today from White Coat Captioning, making this show more accessible. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify, Fauna, and Auth0. So thank you all so much for doing that. Make sure that while you're checking out the site, you check out the schedule, because we have some really incredible stuff going on here where you can hit this add on Google Calendar. That'll add it to your calendar. And tomorrow we're going to have Aisha Blake, who is absolutely wonderful. If you've never seen her before, make sure you come and join. We saw New Relic rated a little bit earlier. Thank you, New Relic, for that. She's going to be showing us how to add observability. And if you're not familiar with observability, you should show up and watch this because it is extremely, extremely useful. And then next week, we've got distributed databases on the Jamstack. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff, and it just keeps going. And I've got a bunch in my inbox that I haven't even added yet. So it's going to be great. Make sure you go here, follow on Twitch if you want to subscribe on Twitch, or you can also always find me on YouTube as well if you want to watch these later. Todd, any parting words for everyone before we wrap this one up?
Yeah, accessibility is a right, not a privilege. Please make things accessible. If you have any questions, please reach out to me on Twitter. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I can always find the answer for you. And yeah, just eat more lobster too.
Love it. All right. Thank you so much, Todd. And thank you, chat. We're going to go find somebody to raid, so hang out. We will see you all tomorrow.